You know the feeling. The day stretches out in front of you. The list is there, the tasks are real. You know it needs to get done, and you genuinely want to do it. But something between wanting and doing just breaks down. You sit down to start, and instead, you stare. Or you sleep. Or you scroll through the same 3 apps in a loop, not because they're interesting, but because moving feels impossible in a way you can't explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. And then comes the voice. The one that's been with you long enough that it sounds like your own thoughts. It calls you lazy, undisciplined, weak. It tells you that other people manage, that people with harder lives and fewer advantages somehow find the energy you can't locate in yourself. And the worst part isn't even the voice. The worst part is that you believe it. You've tried. You've made the lists and set the alarms and had the stern conversations with yourself at midnight about doing better tomorrow. And sometimes tomorrow is better. But then it isn't again, and the cycle continues. And the shame quietly builds on top of the exhaustion that was already there, making the whole thing heavier than it was before. Here's what nobody has told you yet. What you've been calling laziness has a name, and that name is not a character flaw. If that already sounds like something you've lived through, stay with me. And if this channel is new to you, hit subscribe. We break down the psychology behind the things most people are too ashamed to talk about. Drop a comment below too. I read every single one. Because what I'm about to share is going to change the way you see yourself. Not with empty comfort, with something real. Something that actually explains what's been happening inside you all along. Here's what nobody tells you about people who can't seem to get going. It is almost never about motivation, and it is almost never about laziness. Psychologists call it functional freeze, a state where the nervous system gets so overwhelmed that it shuts down the part of your brain responsible for starting things, planning things, and moving from thought to action. Think of it like a circuit breaker. When too much electricity flows through the wires, the breaker trips. Not because the wires are faulty, because the system is protecting itself from overload. Your brain does the exact same thing. When life has been too heavy for too long, too much stress, too much uncertainty, too much pain that never got properly processed, your nervous system doesn't wave a white flag. It quietly goes into protection mode. And protection mode looks a lot like what the world calls laziness. The stillness, the inability to start, the strange exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. That's not weakness. That's your body doing its job. The research behind this is more important than most people realize. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading experts on how stress affects the body, spent decades studying what happens when people carry too much for too long. What he found was striking. When the nervous system stays in a state of high alert, flooded with stress hormones day after day, it eventually does something unexpected. It stops responding to normal signals altogether. The brain's planning center, the part that says, "Okay, let's get started," goes quiet. Not because the person is choosing to be inactive, but because the system has learned that action leads to pain and stillness is safer. In plain terms, your brain learned to stop, and it learned that from experience. There is also a body of research on something called learned helplessness. It was first studied in the 1960s by psychologist Martin Seligman. He found that when a living being is exposed to situations where nothing they do makes a difference, where effort leads nowhere, where trying doesn't change the outcome, they eventually stop trying altogether. Even when the situation changes. Even when trying would now actually work. That's not giving up. That's a nervous system that got very good at protecting you from more disappointment. Here is where it goes deeper than most people ever look. For many people, what looks like laziness started forming in childhood. Not dramatically, quietly. In homes where trying hard still wasn't enough. Where effort wasn't acknowledged or rewarded in the ways a child needs. Where the emotional environment was so unpredictable that the safest thing to do was simply nothing. Because nothing meant no new mistakes, no new criticism, No new proof that you weren't quite good enough. A child in that environment doesn't decide to become unmotivated. Their brain wires itself that way automatically. It is not a choice. It is an adaptation, a very smart one, to a world that made trying feel dangerous. And that wiring doesn't disappear when childhood ends. It comes with you. It sits beneath every to-do list and every alarm and every midnight promise you've made to yourself about being better tomorrow. Not because you're broken, because the pattern was written early and deep, and nobody ever helped you see it for what it was. And now, here is the part that most people never reach. The same nervous system that learned to freeze also learned something extraordinary. It learned to feel everything more deeply than most people do. To notice what others walk past. To carry the weight of a room the moment you walk into it. To sense when something is wrong before anyone says a word. People who struggle with functional freeze are so often the most feeling people in any group. The most perceptive, the most quietly compassionate. The ones who notice the person sitting alone at the edge of the party. The ones who remember what you said 3 months ago because they were actually listening. That depth is not separate from the exhaustion. It comes from the same place. A nervous system this tuned into the world uses an enormous amount of energy just getting through an ordinary day. What looks like laziness from the outside is often just the bill coming due for how hard your mind works all the time without anyone seeing it. You are not doing nothing. You are recovering. There is a difference. So here is what the psychology is actually telling you. The stillness is not a character flaw. The exhaustion is not evidence that you are weak or broken or less than the people around you who seem to move through life with more ease. They are signals. Your body's honest, persistent, often inconvenient way of telling you that something underneath needs attention. Not punishment, not discipline, not one more stern conversation at midnight. You are not lazy. You are not undisciplined. You are not someone who simply doesn't care enough to try. You are someone whose nervous system learned to protect you the only way it knew how. Someone who has been carrying more than most people can see. Someone who deserves to understand what's actually happening inside them before deciding what it means about who they are. The heaviness you feel is real. But the story you've been told about why it's there, that one was never yours to keep. Tell me, does this sound like something you've been living with? Drop it in the comments. You are not alone in this, and I genuinely want to hear from you. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. There's a lot more of this kind of depth coming. And if you want to keep going, the next video explores the psychology of people who are exhausted all the time, even when they haven't done anything, and why that particular kind of tiredness runs so much deeper than sleep.